Hello students, welcome to today's class. Today we will be discussing about the Bronze Age civilizations in context of the world. However, we will be talking about Mesopotamia, which is one of the very important and old civilizations of the world. We have certain objectives of the module and they consist of the following. Defining the meaning of a civilization, to distinguish between the Sumerians and the Akkadians in Mesopotamia, to identify the main languages of early Mesopotamia, to learn about the various political developments in Mesopotamia. Civilization denotes an advanced stage of culture and it acquires this status primarily through revolutions in each sphere of culture. It is noted that when a society invented tools, writing and a calendar, it took a giant step towards highest form of civilization. A well-known scholar, MacLever, believed, he says that our culture is what we are and our civilization is what we use. Essentially, Bronze Age societies mainly flourished on the plains of the large and flooding rivers, but this does not mean that a simple causal connection can be made between all this and the origin of a civilization. It is remarkable to note the fact that the geographical particulars are quite different among the different Bronze Age civilizations. As a rule, on the river plains, communications are easy and civilizations have by definition a vast geographic range which incorporates diverse cultural systems of many communities which may have diverse backgrounds. Mostly civilizations take shape when ruling people organize building projects and pan-regional cults and their ritual centers and mobilize and disperse certain kinds of goods across distances. City or urban life requires the division of labor as well as institutions that maintain law and order. Also, it needs to organize the flow of goods between the specialists that maintain records, etc. Similarly, the new institutions that facilitate the state functioning are systems of law, standardized weights and measures, and the calendric systems. In addition to simple mud huts, there are also elite residences or ritual structures made of brick or stone, together with simple clay figurines, skillfully carved out statues of stone and bronze, and the writing system. The well-known Bronze Age civilizations have been found in different areas and were contemporaries to each other. For example, Egyptian civilization, a civilization on Euphrates and Tigris, that is the Mesopotamian civilization, Indus Valley civilization, and the Chinese civilization. These are essential not only in terms of the historical transformations that essentially brought them into being, but also because the roots of the culture and traditions of their respective regions lie in the Bronze Age. Here the main focus will be the Mesopotamian civilization, wherein more or less similar conditions prevail, which resulted in emergence, rise and the fall of the Bronze Age in Mesopotamia. Now talking about the genesis and the history of this civilization. Mesopotamia is the name that the ancient Greeks gave to a land corresponding to the region of present-day Iraq. It means between the rivers, referring to the Tigris and the Euphrates, which rise in the mountains of Anatolia to flow almost parallel courses down to the Persian Gulf. This region is also called the land of the Shinar and the Fertile Crescent. Mesopotamia civilization was formerly called the Babylonian or Babylonian Assyrian civilization. The new research shows that the civilization was not founded by the Babylonians or the Assyrians, but by much earlier people who were known as the Sumerians. So, it is therefore better to use the geographical term Mesopotamia, which covered the whole civilization. The term in contemporary usage has acquired a broader meaning, referring not just to the lands between the two main rivers, but also their tributaries and valleys, and thus describing an area that includes not only Iraq but also eastern Syria and southeastern Turkey. Finally, it was here that a great civilization was born as early as 3500 BCE. Flood of these two great rivers deposited a layer of fertile soil and thus made it feasible for large-scale agricultural processes. At the same time, the availability of the fine clay facilitated many artisans to create beautiful and well-designed pots. Its soil was also suitable for making building materials, including sun-dried bricks, with which the migrants began to build houses. Unlike other contemporary civilizations, this area did not have natural walls which could protect the inhabitants from various invasions. However, in its long history, this fertile valley attracted hordes of immigrants and invaders. The present climatic conditions of this region are almost similar to those of 8,000 years ago history. An English survey of ruined settlements in the area 48 km around ancient Hatra, which is around 290 km northwest of the present Baghdad. This has shown that the southern limits of the zone in which agriculture is possible without artificial irrigation have remained unaffected since the first settlement. Indeed, the availability of raw materials is a historical factor of great importance, as is the dependence on those materials that are being imported. In Mesopotamia, agricultural products and those from stock breeding, fisheries, date palm cultivation and reed industries were easily available in abundance. In short, grains, vegetables, meat, leather, wool, horn, fish, dates, reed and plant fiber were readily available and could be produced in surplus that could be exported to different trading destinations. Also, there are bitumen springs at Hit, which is near Baghdad, on the Euphrates, the Is of the Herodotus. However, on the other hand, wood, stone and metal, they were very rare or completely absent in this region. The raw material that epitomizes Mesopotamian civilization was clay, which was exclusively used for mud brick architecture and in the number and variety of clay figurines and pottery artifacts. It is significant to mention that Mesopotamia bears the stamp of clay, as does no other civilization, and nowhere in the world was its influence as a vehicle for writing. It was this cuneiform style of writing, in which a cut reed stylus is pressed into soft clay to leave a wedge-like an imprint, invented in Mesopotamia around 3000 BC. Finally, different versions of cuneiform writing were used to write several Near Eastern languages, including Sumerian, Akkadian, Abloite, Elamite, Ugaritic, Hittic and Hurrian. The civilization is known for posterity, city life, its voluminous and rich literature, law codes, mathematics, architecture and astronomy. Mesopotamia had many cultures and languages, and its history is fragmented into several epochs as well. Now first, let us talk about the Sumerians, which are believed to be the earliest settlers of this area. The earliest known civilization was that of Sumer, located in the southernmost part of Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates river, and it was the region which later came to be known as Babylonia. This corresponds in modern time to southern Iraq, covering the region particularly from Baghdad to the Persian Gulf. There is rich debate on the origin and place where the Sumerians actually came from. It may be due to good soil that attracted these settlers to the flat, swampy land of the Sumer. But there are as many as 3 disadvantages. Firstly, the unpredictable flooding of the rivers as well as arid climatic condition. Secondly, no natural defense which could protect them from foreign invasions. And lastly, the minimal natural resources including wood, stone and metal. Over a long period, the people of Sumer created a solution to deal with these issues. To provide water, for example, they dug irrigation ditches that carried water to their fields and allowed them to produce a surplus of different crops. For defense purpose, they succeeded in building city walls with mud bricks. And finally, the Sumerians traded with other various regions for the imports they lacked in their own lands. At the same time, the trade permitted the Sumerians to make tools and also helped them in building houses and other establishments. Sumer region was first occupied between 4500 and 4000 BCE by a non-Semitic people who did not speak the Sumerian language. The people of this region are now called Proto-Euphratians or Ubaidians after the name of village Al-Ubaid, where their remains have been first discovered in the archaeological context. These Ubaidians were the first humanizing force in Sumer, draining the marshes for agriculture, developing trade, and even establishing industries including weaving, leatherwork, metalwork, masonry, and pottery. After their immigration to Mesopotamia, various Semitic people infiltrated their territory and thus creating a high pre-Sumerian civilization. The Sumerians stand out in history as one of the first groups of people to make advancements towards civilization. At least 5 characteristics made Sumer progressive, apart from the earlier human societies: progressive cities, specialized workers, complex institutions, record keeping, and advanced technology. But in the Uruk period, which lasts from around 4000 BCE up to 3000 BCE, the population rose. Many more villages came into existence, and there is evidence for the plough and wheel. Not only this, written records were attested. The invention of the cylindrical seals and the experiments with the construction of large and monumental temples are few more examples. Additionally, the range of materials in use widened very enormously. However, it is not easy to ascertain how these developments led to the expansion and progress. What we all know is that Mesopotamian temple architecture, writing, and pottery forms appear to have been emulated by various communities outside the Sumer region, alongside their own material culture. The people called Sumerians, whose language became the dominant language of the region, most probably came from Anatolia and occupied the Sumer by about 3300 BC. From the 3rd millennium BCE onwards, the region was the site of not less than 12 separate city-states. And these city-states, they included Kish, Erik, which is also known as Uruk, and Ur, Sipar, Akshak, Larak, Nippur, Adab, Umma, Lagash, Bad Tibia, and Larsa. It is interesting to note that each of these states, which have been mentioned above, have a walled structure and it is surrounding villages and land. Each city worshipped its patron deity, which exhibits great prominence of temples in the Sumerian mainland. Political power originally belonged to the citizens, but as the rivalry between various city-states augmented, which consequently led to the adoption of an institution of kingship. However, an extant document, which is named as the Sumerian King List, it records that 8 kings ruled before the Great Flood. In the aftermath of the flood, number of city-states and their kings temporarily gained power over the others. In the course of short Jamdat Nasar period, which lasted from 3100 to 2900 BCE, new developments were forthcoming, including a writing system and seal carving. After that, the early dynastic period was the phase of city-states with numerous temples and fortified palaces. The credit for uniting these city-states goes to Etana, who was the ruler of Kish around 2800 BCE. It is evident after that Kish, Erik, Ur and Lagash vied for ascendancy for a number of years, which made Sumer vulnerable to external conquerors. First the Elamites and later the Akkadians, which were led by the king Sargon. The Akkadians were Semites, a large grouping of people of the Near East who spoke related languages. Under Sargon's able leadership, the Akkadians established the first extensive military empire in Mesopotamia. Though Sargon's dynasty lasted only about 100 years, it played a very important part in uniting the city-states and creating a model of government that influenced the Middle Eastern civilizations considerably. After Sargon's dynasty ended, and Sumer recovered from a very devastating invasion by the semi-barbaric Gutians, the city-states once again became progressive and independent as well. The climax of this era of Sumerian civilization was the rule of the third dynasty of Ur, whose first king, Ur-Nammu, published the earliest law code so far discovered in the Mesopotamian area. The Sumerian language is the oldest written language that was first attested around 3100 BCE in southern Mesopotamia and flourished during the 3rd millennium BCE. In this context, 4 periods of Sumerian language can be distinguished. For example, Archaic Sumerian, Old or Classical Sumerian, New Sumerian and Post-Sumerian. Archaic Sumerian covered a period from approximately 3100 BCE, when the first Sumerian records mark their appearance, down to about 2500 BCE as well. The primary Sumerian writing is exclusively represented by texts of business and administrative character. The archaic Sumerian language is still poorly understood, partly because of the difficulties surrounding the reading and interpretation of early Sumerian writing system and partly because of the meagerness of sources. The Old or Classical period lasted from 2500 to 2300 BCE and thus is generally represented by accounts of the early rulers of Lagash. The documents are business, legal and administrative texts as well as royal and personal inscriptions, letters, both private and official. The above mentioned sources are much more in abundance than those of the earlier periods. During the Sargonic dynasty, the Semantic Akkadians took over the political hegemony of Babylonia and thus marking a definite setback to the progress of the Sumerian language. Around this time, the Akkadian language was used widely throughout the entire area of the Akkadian Empire and the use of the Sumerian was gradually restricted to a small area in the Sumer proper. After a brief revival during the 3rd dynasty of Ur, the new Sumerian period came to an end around 2000 BCE. And finally, in the initial stage of the post-Sumerian period, the use of Sumerian language is extensively attested in the legal and administrative texts as well as the royal inscriptions. According to the Sumerian king list, the 5 rulers of Akkad, which include Sargon, Rimush, Manish-Tushu, Naram-Sin and Shar-Kali-Sharri, they ruled for a total of 142 years, out of which King Sargon is believed to have ruled for some 56 years alone. The sources are considered trustworthy because the king list of Ur III, even 250 years later, did communicate dates which seem to be accurate. In addition to the legend of Sargon of Akkad, there are original inscriptions of the kings of Akkad that have come down to posterity and their geographical distribution generally is more informative than their content. The primary sources for Sargon's reign are copies made by old Babylonian scribes in Nippur from the extensive originals that presumably had been preserved there. These sources are in part Akkadian and in part bilingual, that is Sumerian-Akkadian languages. On the information provided by these sources, King Sargon fought against the Sumerian cities of South Babylonia, threw down city walls, and also took prisoners of war. King Sargon is also said to have captured Lugal Zagesi of Erech, the king who attacked Uruk Agina of Lagash, thus forcing his neck under a yoke and leading him thus to the gate of the god, which is known as Enlil at Nippur. Citizens of Akkad filled the offices of Ensai, which was a city king, from the Nether Sea, the Persian Gulf region, upward, which was also probably a device used by Sargon to further his dynastic aims. In addition to the 34 battles fought in the south, Sargon also tells of conquests in northern Mesopotamia as well. A Mesopotamian record of King Sargon of Akkad refers that ships from Meluha, Magan and Dilmun tied along the quay of the capital city. Akkad shows both seaborne and inland trading contacts. Dilmun can be recognized with Bahrain and Magan with the Makran coast and Oman. Meluha may have been used as a generic term for areas lying east of Mesopotamia and particularly the Indus Valley Civilization area. The king Sargon also appointed one of the daughters priestesses of the moon god in Ur. She took the name of Enheduanna, and later on she was succeeded in the same office by Enmenana, a daughter of King Naram Sin. His daughter Enheduanna must have been a very gifted woman, as two Sumerian hymns by her have been preserved. Also, it is said that she has been instrumental in starting a collection of songs dedicated to the temples of Babylonia. Sargon died at an old age, and the inscriptions, preserved only in copies of his son Rimush, are full of reports about battles fought in Sumer and Iran. Essentially, the sources in the form of engravings left by Manish Tushu, Naram Sin and Shar Kali speak time and again of rebellions and victorious battles. But it is essential to mention that Rimush, Manish Tushu and Shar Kali died violent deaths, which further attests the struggle for power among different rulers. Wars and disturbances, the victory of one and the defeat of another, and even regicide constitute only some aspects revealed by the sources. Whenever these kings tried to fight beyond the immediate Babylonian neighborhood, the campaigns were devoted primarily for trade interests rather than for extending the area under their political control and safeguarding an empire. The king in Akkad required merchandise, money and gold to finance wars, building establishments and the system of administration that he had instituted. The inscriptions of, for example, King Naram Sin that have been found in different areas, including covering a distance of some 998 kilometers as the crow flies, following the Tigris downriver. Also, the places Diyarbakir on the upper Tigris, Nineveh and Tal Barak on upper Khabur river had an Akkadian fortress and garrison as well. The other sites like Susa in Alam, Marad, Puzrish, Dagan, Adab, Nippur, Ur and Girso in Babylonia have a considerable sphere of influence of the Akkadian institutions and supremacy. It was the king Naram Sin who assumed the title king of the four quarters of the earth, that is, of the whole universe. Furthermore, he took the title of god of Akkad, which is in contrast to the titles assumed by his predecessors. Under Akkad, the Akkadian language acquired a literary status that made it equal to the Sumerian language. Under the influence of an Akkadian garrison at Susa, it indeed spread beyond the boundaries of Mesopotamia. Essentially, after having employed for several centuries an indigenous script patterned after cuneiform writing, Elam adopted Mesopotamian script during the Akkadian period. However, the old Akkadian manner of writing is essentially appealing from the aesthetic point of view, and it later on served a model for monumental inscriptions as well. Also, the plastic and graphic arts, especially the sculpture in around relief work and cylinder seals, reached the high point of perfection during this time period. Thus, the rule of the 5 Akkadian kings may be considered one of the most productive periods of Mesopotamian history. Separatist forces, without doubt, opposed all unifying tendencies, but still, Akkad brought about a broadening of political horizons and dimensions. This period of Mesopotamian history fascinated historiographers, as did a few other periods, having contributed its share to the storehouse of legend. It never disappeared from the memories. The end of the dynasty is revealed by the fact that after the king Sharkali Sharri, only the names and few brief inscriptions have survived. However, there is no unanimity among the scholars about the decline of Akkadian civilization, but most probably two factors played a very important role in its downfall. Firstly, the invasion of the nomadic Amuras, who are also known as Amorites, called Martu from the northwest, and the infiltration of the Gutianes, which came apparently from the region between the Tigris and the Zagros mountains to the east. There is no denying of the fact that these invasions were provoked and facilitated by the weakness and internal problems of the Akkadian state. Utuhigel of Erech is credited for having overthrown the Gutianes' rule by conquering this region. Utuhigel was the brother of Ur-Nammu, who founded the third dynasty of Ur. Under Ur-Nammu and his successors, this dynasty lasted for about a century, from about 2112 up to around 2004 BCE. The greatest king, Ur-Nammu, defeated the rulers of Lagash and thus coveted overseas trade with the regions like Dilmun, Magan and Meloha to flow and prosper through the Ur city. It is well known by the new royal titles that he had built up a state which comprised at least the southern part of Mesopotamia. He also built a number of establishments which includes the very impressive ziggurats of Ur and Erech, which have acquired their final monumental glory. The historiographers have given the name of Code of Ur-Nammu to a literary testament that is the oldest known surviving example of a genre extending through the code of Lipit Ishtar in Sumerian language to that of Code of Hammurabi, written in Akkadian language. The decline of the Ur third dynasty is an event in the Mesopotamian history that can be written with more incredible details than any other event. It was due to the sources such as royal correspondence, two elegies on the destruction of Ur and Sumer, and an archive from Aishan that shows how Eshbi-Erra, usurping and the king of Ishan, eliminated his earlier overlord in the Ur region. The Eshbi-Erra essentially strengthened his dominions. Still, Abisin continued for 14 years to rule over a limited portion of this land. The end of Ur came about by a number of misfortunes, but the most dominating was a famine, due to which the Ur city was besieged, taken and destroyed by the invading Elamites. Now, to conclude this lesson, we'll say that like Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia was the birthplace of civilizations throughout the world. However, unlike Egypt, Mesopotamia was the home of not one but a series of glorious civilizations. For example, the civilizations of Sumer, Akkad, Babylonia and Assyria that together flourished for more than 3 millennia in the past. These civilizations of Mesopotamian history are united by a series of mutual denominators, including the land of the twin rivers, that is, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and the assets it possessed. The gods and goddesses, the cities, the world's first cities that rose and chopped with their towers and temples as well, the lawmakers and empire builders and whatnot. Similarly, the farmers, merchants and artisans who lived out their day-to-day lives, and the writers who articulated their story in the world's oldest writing system and the works of literature. All this still survives, which speaks of a search for meaning in land that time and again saw the hopes of humankind unsatisfied by nature's power or man's rapacious greediness. So students, this is all what we have to study about the beginning of the Mesopotamian era. Hope you have enjoyed the class. Thank you so much.